Hello, folks. Thanks for coming today. Again, this is Armand Pantalone, the Chief Technology Officer at Giga-tronics, for another one of our TEmS talks. TEmS being the Giga-tronics RF Threat Emulation System. And today we're going to focus specifically on the RF Threat Emulation System instead of some of the recent videos that have been some of the additional test assets that we've been adding to our quiver. So one of the things we really want to focus on today is the ability to create emitters that look very realistic, like the radar threats we're trying to emulate. And one of the important features of that consideration is that you have to be able to create the pulses and the waveforms from the radars that are very tactically significant. So the modulations that these radars employ is very important. So we'll be showing you today how to set up emitters on platforms and how to selectively create modes, radar modes, that intelligently use the modulations available that make them look like a real threat tactical radar. So among those things we'll be showing you, some of the modulations would be, CW and pulse CW, linear FM or chirps, phase shift keying, frequency shift keying, amplitude modulation, etc. So we'll show you some of those today, and we'll show you how easy it is to set up the parameters to control those, and how easy it is to attach any one of those type of modulations to certain pulses and to certain radar modes, and to drop them into an engagement in a scenario that makes them look tactically relevant. So the important feature today we want to highlight is the ability to do various modulations to the radar pulses, and that will include pulse CW, linear FM or chirps, frequency shift keying, phase shift keying, and while we already did AWG, arbitrary waveform generation, in the previous episodes, we can also do QAM or amplitude modulation. That's more comm stuff than radar stuff, even though it's emerging today. So we'll save that one for another time. So to keep this video somewhat short and to the point, there's 100 different ways in this emulator to actually create very complex modulations, and also to create emitters and scenarios with a mixture of all of these modulations, and you can stack them on top of each other for very complicated, very realistic simulations of certain threats out there in the real world, or that you have devised and want to test against. However, to make it simple and short for a video demonstration today, I just have one emitter radiating to my system under test receiver. They're fixed in their locations, but the platform that's emitting has one emitter, but it has 4 separate radar modes that I'm going to cycle through, and we'll show you each one of those has a single radar modulation attached to it, and we're just going to cycle through those in the scenario with a very simple control, just to show you the differences in the modulations and what they look like in the emitter editor and the scenario editor. So to show you the different modulations that we're going to attach to the pulses on each of these emitters, we just want to show you that we'll show you the controls in a moment, but these are the 4 radar modes we're going to show you. The pulse CW is mode 1, mode 2 is a linear frequency modulation or chirp, mode 3 is phase shift keying, mode 4 is frequency shift keying, and then we attach those to engagements. All of the engagements do is just pick a single radar mode instead of multiple radar modes, just for the ease of showing you what we're going to show you today. So for the modulation options, really quickly, we've already done an entire segment on the arbitrary waveform generation. This one just happens to be a 10 megahertz linear frequency modulation, but we're going to actually do that with the LFM function. We showed you a more complex one with an amplitude taper before. The linear frequency modulation or chirp is very simple. One control is at the beginning of the pulse, what frequency offset relative to the normal pulse CW center do you want it to start at, and at what rate do you want it to chirp. And even though this particular one is always starting below the center frequency and going up, you could also start above the center frequency and go down to do a down chirp. There's a couple different rates here. For instance, this guy is starting at 25 megahertz below the center frequency and chirping at 1 megahertz per microsecond. There's another one here that's also starting at 25 meg below, but he's also chirping a much higher rate at 5 megahertz per microsecond. And this one is a pseudo pulse CW because he has no chirp rate associated with it, but he has a frequency offset. For phase shift keying, all we're doing right here is we're telling you of all the different phase shifts we want, what are the values going to be from 0. So This one is just going to be a very simple 0-180 binary phase shift keying one we're going to show you today. The other modulation we're going to show you today is the frequency shift keying. And what this one really is going to be is it's going to be pulse CW, but at what frequency off the center do you want it to appear at? So for this simple one, we're going to do -5 megahertz, +5 megahertz, -10 megahertz, and +10 megahertz. And we also have quadrature amplitude modulations, but I didn't define those, and I'm not going to right now. So if you're an astute observer and you actually watched the emitter that I was showing you all those modulation definitions for, is this guy right here. And this guy is going to be this emitter with 4 different modulations in 4 different radar modes, mode 1 through 4, are all going to be part of this scenario here. This scenario here has those. One platform is the system on the test receiver, right there at map center. The platform we're going to be showing you the different modulations on is set at 5 kilometers to the west of him. And he's stationary, as is the system on the test receiver. But if you look at every one of these emitters, they have a different radar mode assigned to them. So the first guy is going to be pulse CW. The second mode is going to be the LFM. The third mode is going to be the PSK, or the phase shift keying. And the fourth is going to be the frequency shift keying. While this is a 2-channel RF threat emulator, it's just a demonstration system, a demo system for product development and also for customer engagement. We normally sell it in a 2- and 4-channel system, now also an 8-channel system. But for now, all I have to show you is a 2-channel system. So I can't show you all 4 modes at once because they're fighting for space in the RF realm. And instead of getting into some very complicated scenarios where they're all coming out channel 1, which I can certainly do, it's hard to show you one particular mode only with all these different modulations if I put them all out of the same RF channel. So I'm going to force them in the software, which is one of the open ear range settings. I'm going to force the modulation I want to show you in one particular segment that we're going to video to a certain RF channel and show it to you on both the digital oscilloscope and also on the spectrum analyzer. So in this emitter, the first mode we want to show you is the pulse CW. And to show you that, you're going to still see 2 channels on the digital oscilloscope of the 4 channels of RF that's being created. But I'm also going to force in the software, this is the open ear range application we have where we can force an emitter to a certain RF channel so we can cable up to high power amplifiers and directional antennas. In the lab, sometimes you don't want to do that. But in the lab like this, to force it to a spectrum analyzer, we can use the same feature. So channel 1 assigned to the spectrum analyzer and also channel 1 on the digital oscilloscope is going to be the pulse CW when we hit run. So what we have here, channel 1 in blue is just the pulse CW. At the center frequency, it looks pretty static because there's only 1 pulse width, 1 PRI, and 1 center frequency, no offset, no modulation. Pretty simple. And what that looks like on the spectrum analyzer. What that looks like on the spectrum analyzer is a very simple sine x over x or sinc function. Centered around it, you could see very clearly a very fixed pulse width PRI in the frequency domain based on the main lobe and side lobe width. So that's a very simple pulse CW. And we'll move on to the next modulation in a second. So for this product demonstration video purposes, we're going to leave simulation live run mode, go back to editor mode. I'm going to take the pulse CW emitter. I'm going to unassign them to any specific channel. I'm going to take the linear FM, assign him to the RF channel that's going to the spectrum analyzer, and we're going to resave that scenario. And we're going to go back to simulation mode, and when it's ready, we're going to run it. So we'll show you the details in a minute, but there's actually 3 separate chirps in this emitter. There's one stuffed all the way down to the left end of the area. It's a narrower chirp starting at 25 megahertz below for 10 megahertz. There's a 20 megahertz chirp in there. Then there's also a 40 megahertz chirp in there. So we're going to look like that on the spectrum analyzer now. Increase the span. And we'll do a max hold. So we've got the narrow band chirp with a high frequency offset to the negative. We have the wider chirp at the center frequency, center around it, both up chirps. We also have that one where we showed you, if you have a 0 chirp rate, it's the same as a pulse CW, but that one had a 12.5 megahertz offset in the center. So that's what that one looks like. So we're going to zoom in on a wide span. This BPSK looks like pulse CW. If you're looking closely, it looks different. So we'll zoom in, and we couldn't quite see the codes in the phase shift keying chain in the chips there. But because it's not a pulse CW spectrum, and it's got the dual lobed, because we're only shifting between 0 and 180, that's what it'll look like in the frequency domain. So we're going to leave the phase shift keying, which is the 3rd modulation, and move on to the frequency shift keying, which is the last modulation we're going to show you detail of tonight. So to do that, we're going to deselect this guy, force to channel 1, and we're going to select this guy for RF channel 1, which goes to the spectrum analyzer. And channel 1 in blue on the digital oscilloscope, as you could tell from the spectrum display on the digital scope. And you can see the 4 FSK frequency shift keying. It'll look a little bit better on the spectrum analyzer. As we pan down to there. So there's our 50 megahertz span. And if we do a max hold on that guy, you'll very clearly see the 4 frequency shifts. Here's the center, -5, +5 megahertz. -10 and +10 megahertz. You can set those. It doesn't have to be a multiple of 5. It could be anything. And that's what that last FSK modulation looks like. So as the grand finale, so to say, instead of showing you one modulation at a time, I've removed all the forced restrictions on which emitters go out which channels, just to show it to you one modulation per RF channel on the spectrum analyzer, for instance. So now I've removed all that, and every one of the pulses is staggered in time. So all the modulations you should be able to see on the spectrum analyzer, because they're all staggered in time in the lab environment, the non-open air range environment. We're not forcing emitters to RF channels. They're all going to fight for space that's available on the first RF channel, and then whatever is not available for time collisions, they're going to go through the 2nd RF channel, and the 3rd RF channel, and the 4th RF channel. So with this 2-channel demo system, I've removed all those restrictions, and you should see all the modulations on the spectrum analyzer because they're all staggered in time. So when I hit when I hit run, you'll see all the different modulations and all the pulses out of all the RF channels on digital oscilloscope. And on the spectrum analyzer, if you come down here, you can see the pulse CW in the center. You can see the 4 frequency shift keying at -5, 10, +5, +10 megahertz. And you can see the 3 different chirps in the center there. And what that looks like if we get down there. And what it looks like on the spectrum analyzer, if we would go to max hold, you should see all the different modulations. The narrowband chirp at a high offset, the wideband chirp at the center, the pulse CW in the center, and the 4 frequency modulations. Sorry, the frequency shift keying outputs as well. All in the same scenario, all at the same emitter. Each radar mode has a different modulation assigned to it, and all of them are being exercised by the same platform with the same emitter, just calling up different radar modes with different modulations. Okay, so in conclusion, what we really wanted to show you today was the ability to simulate some very realistic radar pulses. That's very important to an RF threat emulator. So we showed you the ability on a single platform to attach multiple emitters to it. And in any of those emitters, you could attach multiple modulations, any one of the ones we just described today. And you can cycle through those in any set order that your threat needs to have it look like that. Again, the important thing is that the RF coming out of the machine looks very representative of what a realistic radar threat would be. So all these modulations are sort of key. I showed you how easy it is to change the parameters to control them, the modulations, and how easy it is to attach to an emitter, and to how set up the pulse width, the PRIs, the modulations, and the center frequencies. We'll save that for another time. So thanks again for coming to another installment of the Giga-tronics RF Threat Emulation System, or TEmS Talks. And as always, a wise word of advice and caution. We are what you would call professionals, so please don't try this at home.